Tremendous guest this week, Dr. Corey Castillo, bodybuilder, runs a law firm, tremendous husband and father, and one of the most skillful applied philosophical Stoics that is living in the world today, dropping pearls of wisdom about how to actually take all this esoteric information and apply it in the real world. Tune in for this one.
Yeah, you definitely want to check this out if you're working on how to develop more discipline, how to develop more focus, how to have a stronger why, or potentially how to realize why you're not able to step into discipline. Tune in. Excellent episode. All right, welcome to the Wenner Folsom podcast, your source for battle-tested leadership and resiliency. We got a great guest for you today. Really excited to jump in.
And this is a man that has been a friend of mine for years, an accountability partner for years, a business partner for years, Dr. Corey Castillo. Bro, it's really fun to have you on the podcast to chop up some leadership, fitness, resiliency work. And before we hit record, we were talking about testosterone. Yeah. And this is a topic that is being normalized in at least the men's community. And it's a question that I get asked a lot. In fact, I have a message in my inbox from a friend of ours, a collective friend of all of ours, who's asking like, hey, who's your doctor and how does that work? And what's it cost? And anyway, so I just thought, hey, this is a great conversation to jump into. And then we're going to move into some philosophy, some leadership stuff. Quick intro on our friend Corey is, you're one of the most holistically successful men that I know.
Appreciate that, man.
Let it in, man. Let it in.
All right. I'm gonna take that. I'm gonna save
it.
There
you go. You competed in bodybuilding. You're running a law firm. You're hosting men's works. You're a published author, a philosopher, and yet somehow you managed to be a husband and a father. I mean, how do you do all this shit? Like that's a full load. Any one of those things, a lot of men would aspire to achieve.
Yeah. Well, I think if that's not a rhetorical question, if it's actually like, well, what do we have to frame so that we can handle all these different pistons firing in our lives without compromise? Well, it's like, well, there's going to be a sacrifice no matter what. You're always going to compromise something. So it's like, okay, well, what am I willing to give up? But then more so, why am I willing to give up what I'm willing to give up? Meaning, what's on the other side of these achievements holistically? What am I doing it for? Because when it becomes hard and you're putting in 14, 15-hour days, you're crumbling, your quality is being compromised in one aspect or another. It's like, well, ultimately, what's the meaning behind all of it? And I think that's where it ultimately rests onto a personal philosophy. And a base upon which that personal philosophy rests on. I know that you and I discuss that all the time. It's like, well, why are we tackling all this shit? Why are we going 100 miles per hour and trying to do more and more and more?
What's your answer?
Well, I think it rests in two buckets: running towards something and running from something. No matter what, we're going to be committed.
We already got duality going on.
Yeah, we're committed to winning and we're committed to not losing. And usually we don't like to talk about the not losing motivation because it's fear-based and there's a popularity around, I don't want to, I'm just a winner through and through. I don't want to talk about the not losing thing, but it's a reality. We don't want to come in second when we could come in first. So I'd say on the motivation through winning perspective, it's the idea that there's still room on the table to become a greater man. And I know we can talk about what excellence amongst men is in the different roles that we play in our life story. And then on the not losing motivation piece, it's like, well, when we are looking at our lives in retrospect, we can call that our dying day. Do we want to look back and go, okay, I regret not doing that. I regret that I didn't do better in some sense or another. And that's a fear that is very real. And I don't want to experience that. I want to be able to rest in fullness, knowing, hey, I'm satisfied with how I contended in life.
You guys are two of the men I know who have both actually competed on stage, shirts off, to the world with what you built. And I guess question to both of you, was that avoiding regret part of it? Was there a little bit in there? And to you, Josh, what was your?
No,
I went through your journey with you. You know, I mean, it was a big. You sacrificed.
Yeah, it's really funny why we do things. I think for me, it was actually our Grails process. We have a goal setting system called Grails, and I'd been tracking my progress. And one of the things I kept working on is sleep, which I'm still working on, and water. And I tend to be a busy entrepreneur that tends to avoid myself, and I tend to lean a little bit more towards giving everything I got to everybody else, and struggle with the self-care, self-nurture, which includes sleep and water. So for me, it actually came from, if I'm going to compete, I have to drink a gallon plus of water a day, and I'm going to have to sleep, because you can't build muscle if you don't sleep. And so that was really the leverage that I needed, is if I'm going to be on stage competing, because I really love competition, then I have to sacrifice, to the conversation earlier, my little adequate stories or all my reasons why I'm not sleeping and not drinking water. It now becomes a must. So that was my leverage. It actually had nothing to do with anything else besides that. And the irony I found is, by committing to the process, it's now become a way of life in general. It's like I learned the simplicity of, I didn't need food. I didn't need the taste of food. There was a lot of distractions that when I just resettling back in after a show, and now I'm recommitting, I realized like, when I'm need to do a project, instead of just getting in action, I take a couple minutes and then I go looking around the house. And if I have food, I start eating. So I started to realize, through just the sacrifice of it, those things are priority. And really, I think my main lesson to get is, this body is our vehicle for experiencing life. And when we optimize the body through proper nutrition, proper water, proper sleep, proper sun, proper rest, proper active recovery, because you have to do it. If you don't rest, you can't actually compete and you can't perform at a high level. Then we lose our ability to actually interpret, our senses, our ability to interpret and actually actualize in the world is like at a bare minimum. So for me, it became a way of living to actualize my greatest potential. And the natural effect was, I'm able to take on more projects, but one with presence. And I think that's actually our power. So I wanted to add that one piece in. I know I want to hear your answer as well, Corey, but there's one other piece is, if we do a lot of projects, but we're not present, then to me, it's all a waste, in my personal opinion, because that's what counts. And most of our trauma in childhood counts because we didn't have parents that were present with us and didn't love us and couldn't actually be there. So if you could take on the whole world, but you're not present with yourself, your spouse, your kids, I would say you're still losing the game. And so I just wanted to plug that in there, because it's and part of that is the conversation we're having now is self-care. Can you actually be present with yourself? And if you can, then you can be present with whatever you're doing. So but curious about you, Corey.
I've got a couple questions though, because I love that. So it sounds like it was the pursuit of discipline and a cleaner interpretation of the world, and therefore then the ability to compete was just a byproduct of that. It's, let me focus on anchoring this discipline. This discipline will give me a more sober interpretation of how to perceive the world. Oh, and then by the way, now I'm able to also compete on stage.
Correct. And it also showed up for me. I think there's some of us that tend to be more self-focused, meaning when things happen in the world, we're kind of go into our own self world. And there's others like me who tend to give everything I got to the whole world when I go offline. So it forced me to focus on taking care of self. It forced me to shore off my stories of why I couldn't make my own meals or why I needed a partner to do all the things in my house. And it forced me to just use the discipline to get it done. And when it did, I got greater integrity. I got better in line with myself, and I became a better man. And so now when it's in place, I nurture myself. I feed myself. Everything, it's actually become really efficient. My shopping, my food prep, even feeding myself, when it's in a schedule for me, I work really well and it manages my ADD. When I don't have it, I'm actually really bad. I kind of float like a leaf and skip meals and eat shit food and do the whole thing. So for me, it's becoming a way of living for self-care. I think that's the root. And the self-care, to your point, is the body, which is actualizing the rest of life. So it's the self-care for the inner work so that I can actually do the real outer work. So I think it's an inside game out. It's not an outside game in.
Well, connecting that to what you said around interpreting the world, Philip and I have talked a lot about discernment and interpreting the world in a way that is free of distraction and free of smoke to see it more clearly. And I know this is a greater and greater task with all the shit out there that's more stimulation, more information than any era of civilization has ever experienced. It's really easy to see what's not there and not see what is there. And obviously the layers within that. So after you intentionally imposed this cleansing cycle onto yourself for a cleaner interpretation, perhaps more so discernment in how you're perceiving the world, what do you see now that you didn't see when perhaps you were clouded a few months back?
And and Corey doesn't even know about your feminine cleanse, and it's ironic to use that word. So
yeah, so I stacked everything. I stacked anything and everything. So I did a 4-month feminine cleanse, meaning no porn, no feminine energy besides just strictly platonic relationships.
Yeah.
And I also quit caffeine because I tend to get too manic, especially when I go offline. And so I was like, this isn't serving me. So I quit everything at once. So the first month was really difficult, but to give you the net, I think the discipline with following through on my integrity of here's what I'm doing, my morning rituals, my training, my water, my sleep, I replaced porn with these devotional practices, which essentially moved my sexual energy from desire up into wisdom and connected me into source. And what ended the net of it was I got in deep integrity with myself, which I know Philip talks a lot about, a quote from Jordan Peterson of when we're lying to the world and we're lying to ourselves, our internal compass is off. So we're kind of like, what's what? And so I think that integrity and discipline and follow through and doing it over and over again and pushing through really hard shit. Cause everything comes up. I pulled my hamstring, like everything came up during that process.
Yeah.
And I just stopped listening to stories that would have thrown me off and just moved into action because I didn't have a choice. It was like, no, here's what I'm doing. I'm not going to miss. Even on the retreat, I meal prep for our tactical retreat. I did my devotional practices at night. Like anything I did, I didn't
that was
miss.
some impressive shit, bro. I was impressed.
Well, so
integrity, just to land for you,
Yeah.
integrity with self gave me the clarity to trust myself. And when I could trust myself, I wasn't clouded because I know now I could trust myself. And that gave me the power to, like, for instant discernment, because I can feel into now the body that I'm using as a full source. I can have immediate integrity and trust in myself. There's no leaky, sneaky energy. And I'm able to go yes or no. So it allows me to engage with the world at a really high level of integrity, which gave me all this power because I'm like, I can finally trust myself. Because in the past I couldn't. I'd say no porn and then I'd fucking do porn, or I'm going to do this. And then I wouldn't follow through with something that I personally set. It wasn't even with the world. It was my own internal, here's what I want to do and not doing it. And that created the cloudiness versus
and hey, here's the segue to Corey. When my previous question, how did you do all these things? Well, you have tremendous discipline. That's really what Josh is saying is, Josh has leveled up the discipline practice around women, porn, diet, everything. And I think that's probably the core of what your bodybuilding was too. Because come on, Dr. Castillo, law firm, for everything, all the shit you do. It's amazing.
Yeah. Well, so I think there's a few different ways to probably frame it, because the discipline piece, I think that's a greater pursuit than what most folks pursue, which is motivation. I want to be motivated. I want to feel motivated. It's like, well, motivation is in this context synonymous with excitement. It's like, well, I want to be excited. Well, no one's naturally excited about everything all the time. A discipline picks up what motivation puts down. It's an inconsistent and unreliable source. So let's go with discipline, and discipline's doing it anyway. Well, in order to activate discipline, there has to be something on the other side of discipline. Like, why is this important? Why is this meaningful in this story of my life? And I think that's the first component. Then it's activating all of our natural mechanisms. So for example, our anger and aggression mechanism, it's in us, it's functional, it's got a value to it. It's usually thought of as something that's negative, like, don't be angry. Well, it's in our nature to become angry, but let's direct that anger to something that's going to serve us well. So I think circling to the why a bodybuilding competition, it's translating the question of looking at others and go, why not me? Or what, why them to why not me? Why is it that they get to do that? How did that guy just walk on stage and do that? How did that guy just put together that coaching program? How did that guy just put together that retreat? and then activating the aggression mechanism and go, well, why not me? Because the why not me is a punch back question. It's, well, how come I'm not jumping in the ring? Well, let me jump in the ring and start doing it and give myself the forgiveness to swing and miss, because I know I'm eventually going to hit and I'm going to actually start landing a few punches. So I think it's translating it from a reason for discipline or the application of discipline to then also activating our natural gifts, aggression being one of them.
Curious, Corey, did yours have anything to do with your family being an example, being a model? Did it have anything to do with, because there's one more component that
Good
I'm tracking
question.
here, which is the service element. I always failed when it was about me. It wasn't until I converted it into something greater, to your why comment.
Yeah.
That was about, like, I can't run a men's community and be in integrity if I'm fat and out of shape. Like,
Yeah.
really directly. I can't inspire other men if I can't handle this area of my life. So that was a really direct. So it wasn't about me anymore, because I always failed. But when it became about them and like, oh, how many men out there do I need to be an example for them to actually use our work, which changes lives. But if they don't trust me, they're never going to get into the work. So that was so I'm curious, was there a service element?
And that's the
component for you?
honor lever. Talk about aggression, Corey. Honor is another big lever.
Yeah. Well, on that piece, I think there's two, but because you started with the family component, then it sounded like what you're talking about was credibility and believability through exemplification, meaning, hey, I'm going through this as well. I'm inviting you as a buddy of mine, someone who's sharing this with me, to come do this. I'm not just kind of preaching from the sake of theory. So I think that's a huge component. I think there was a little bit of that. In terms of the family thing, it was not a service to my family or anything therein. I mean, I've got, my family lineage is one that I regard. I do have a respect for a lot of hard work that was put in to allow me to be in the States and do what I got to do in the States. But I am a completely different brand from my family. This compete with life, bite the bullet, do the hard shit, face what is ugly and tackle it head on, impose hyper accountability and responsibility, and tame our proclivity to be about self and have a self-aggrandization. A lot of those things are something that probably started with me. I subscribe to the idea that men can break generational curses and women can heal generational wounds. And I really thought about what is explicitly and implicitly passed down through generations and how each generation has the opportunity to course correct. And that was something that I think probably was maybe a subconscious motivation at that time, given that I'm looking, 10, 11 years back in retrospect, but it's probably a desire to change course there.
Breaking the family curse.
Yeah.
Breaking the family curse. Such deep
Me too.
work.
Yeah. When we talk about these core drivers that have been dismissed by society, and aggression is one of them. Like, that's bad. Anger is bad.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, you already used another one, regret.
Yeah.
Well, regret is a evolutionary function. It exists for a purpose. It's a negative feeling that is applied to something that you should have done. Yeah. And it stops you from not doing those things that you should have done. And the same thing with shame. Everybody goes like, oh, shame is so terrible. Don't ever be ashamed. It's like, well, shame exists for a reason.
Exactly.
It provides, and judgment exists for a reason.
Correct. And one of the things that I think is hurting us more than anything is the numbness to it. So a shamelessness, we're not getting rid of shame. We're just throwing it under the rug and embracing the, well, I do me, you only live once type of lack of accountability. Well, it's like, okay, if we throw away our connection to shame, that is to say, deconstruct a standard that we now remove ourselves from, well, there's a consequence to that. On the front end, it might feel good because you can say, well, I do whatever I want, however I want, whenever I want. Well, okay, then what standards, what foundation are we actually living on outside of just me, 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 me? And that's where I think in throwing shame under the rug, we've killed honor. But then now connecting that to something that you shared earlier, Philip, when you said, well, it's bad to be angry or aggressive. This common and I would even say fashionable trend to poo-poo on these just natural features of life, these truths that are inevitable and inescapable in the human condition, and focus on what should be without recognition to what is where I think we're going. And there's a lot of false nobility, false virtues that come from that. So for example, we've seen a lot of guys speak on, oh, anger is bad. You have to connect, you have to be passive. Oh, standing for this or against that is bad. You have to be more universal and stand for everything, and butcher the term inclusive. We got to be inclusive of everything, everywhere, for everyone and anything. Well, okay, that's not a reliable model. That's not a reliable character in any story. And I think we're seeing the effects of that because we're looking through an idealistic lens on how we think the world should be without predicating that on how it is. So we're prescribing a false world with false characters onto ourselves. And that's where I think we're seeing a lot of the mental health issues, because it's an irreconcilable ideology to adopt in going, okay, well, I think the world should be like this. I'm ignoring that it's actually like this. So I'm getting punched in the face by the truth that is part of this world, but I don't actually acknowledge that truth. So I don't know why I'm getting punched in the face. Oh, and now I'm confused and I don't know why.
Yeah, I think it also ties to just a lot of, again, the way I think the lens I see, I do so much trauma work and childhood wounding, and that it all boils back to childhood. And a majority of us didn't get our needs met at some level and felt victimized and subscribed to that villain victim savior of somebody left, somebody abandoned us, somebody didn't give us the love we needed, and we felt like a victim in that moment, and we felt when we may have been victimized, and then the model of the world inadequate. So with that, then there's obviously a villain who did it, and then we get on a trajectory to try to avenge the villain. Every story, right? Every story happens because there's a villain that takes something and somebody goes on a jury to avenge. So, with society, who would we be without our villains? Who would we be without an opponent, essentially? So I think it's baked into society as part of the narrative to make it interesting, if you will. But then we get lost in that a lot of times, and then we forget. And it's a really easy bypass story of not accepting responsibility, because if there's a villain out there, it's creating all the problems, it's not your fault. That means there's nothing you can do to change it. It's the villain's fault. So the ownership piece is what this what it boils down to is the self-ownership of, hey, what do I want to create with my life, and what can I actually control? Because you can't control anybody else. There's a lot of things we can't control that we get so upset about, when in actuality we could say, hey, I'm responsible for my life, where I'm going to go in the world, and what I'm going to create in the world. And that's the inside out game that I think we're now witnessing, is we're seeing our society reflected by our state of the consciousness, and our state of the consciousness is the world.
And I just wanted to put a closure on that, because you gave the first half of all the stories, right? Or I'm a victim, there's a villain, somebody's going to save me. Like, that's the inherently adolescent beginning to every story. That version of the story then tips over to the realization that I'm the one creating the story. I'm participating in the villainous nature of this. The villain is me. Like, that has to happen at some point, right? Well, Harry Potter or the Darth Vader, like, at some point we have to get to that place as a society where we're realizing that, well, the villain is actually me. I'm the villain, and my behavior is the source of all of that dysfunction in the world. So let's start out addressing that, and that's redemption. That is the redemptive story.
Well, it's redemption, it's initiation, it's a sense of maturity. And I'm wondering what, we're speaking in an aggregate, but what the catalyst is for making that change. Because I agree, I think there's a very popular victim villain narrative that folks adopt, or I might even say oppressor, more on a collective level, that is popular, intriguing. There's an entertainment component because it's exciting, it's stimulating. The villain never thinks that they're the villain. So it's always a back and forth between, you're the villain, no, I'm not, yes, you are, no, I'm not. There's no value in that. If we adopt a victim mentality, we waive our rights to the glory that comes with a champion mentality. Whereas if we take on a champion mentality, we might waive our rights to the empathy and the sympathy that comes with a victim role. So it's like, it's hard to do both, to be both a victim and a champion. You got to put one down to pick up the other. And I think maybe that's the transition that Philip just described. But I'm wondering what the disrupting catalyst is on helping folks to hit that brick wall and go, okay, I am my own villain. This victim mentality, whether there's validity to it or not, and we can all argue either which way, doesn't serve me nor others, because I can't fill others' tanks if I'm not filling my own. After hitting that brick wall, or I should say maybe, what do you think puts that brick wall in front of us that we can start to run through and get past eventually?
Hey, we thank you for listening to the Wenner Folsom podcast. Just a couple quick notes. First, if you are a man and you're looking for an honorable and inspiring group of men to hold you accountable and challenge you to grow in your relationships, your fitness, your career, your finances, and your life, go to www.k4men.com. And if you are a veteran, first responder, or man or woman who deals with trauma, and you're looking for some resiliency tools and skills for you, your team, or your organization, go to valorresiliency.com. Hope to see you there. Back to the podcast. And I just want to clarify, for me, I see it as it's any of the three. It's something called the Dharma triangle. We call it the trauma triangle. And it's just they're all ways of avoiding responsibilities. Some people are more savior and they want to go save everyone. Some people claim the victim story, and other people are always blaming everybody else. They're the villain. So and essentially, anytime we're in that, we recreate it and we attract people in it. So if I'm the savior, I'm going to go find victims and I'm going to go save them. And then I'm going to end up the villain, or they're going to end up the villain, and vice versa. So for me, I think it gets to a point where you're sick of not getting the results that you want in your life, or you're sick of not having the relationship that you want, or the body that you want, or the dreams that you have in your life. You're sick of not achieving them. And at some point, instead of blaming the world or going to save the world or claiming victim to the world, you start to say, all right, I'm going to change this. I'm going to choose to take ownership. And hopefully, and if not, there's men's communities here. There's a good men, at least from the masculine. Like, I needed good men. I was a lone wolf. That's what finally got my ass in gear, is I actually had a community to hold me accountable. And Philip blocks the exits. I know you guys do accountability. So I had good men that I trusted, that I could let them in on what I was going through, and they could carry it with me. 1, 2, they could challenge me to say, hey man, you're better than that. Like, there's a better version of you, and you don't get to run anymore. You don't get to go save everybody anymore. You don't get to call victim. You don't get to be the villain and make everybody, like, you have to claim this. And it's time. It's time. The world needs this.
And that's what it is. It's lovingly calling each other out. And that's what I think the catalyst is either is or is something close to that. Because if I see you stuck in this triangle that you've shared, and I don't call you out gracefully and appropriately, of course, that means I'm putting my comfort over your well-being, which is unloving. But if I, with the right intent, say, hey man, let's get you out of this cycle, and you might on the front end despise me for that, that's the most loving thing I could do, because I'm putting both your comfort and my comfort aside to champion your excellence in what is good and truthful.
One of the guys, the K4 guys, I heard him say to another man, he goes, allow me to care more about your future than your feelings right now. I was like, oh, damn. And I guess when you're in an honor-based community, like, you and I treat each other honorably, we, respect each other. K4, an honor-based community. Yeah. The whole Valor crew. When you're on the inside of that and you're checking other men and women about their behavior and their standards and their self-care and their resiliency, you're not shaming them. You're holding them accountable. Mm-hmm. When you're outside of that honor-based community or the kinship system, now when you check somebody, it's shameful. It's the same dynamic and engine and intention. It's just there's an inside or outside in the way we interpret that engagement. And it's really important, because we're built for tribe, obviously. So we're built to hold each other accountable, right? And so it's a tricky distinction there about when you're allowed to check another person about their adolescent behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree, Philip. I feel like you have to be embedded into a culture, because typically just being around men and sports and so many things around years, even though there's high integrity on a sports team, even guys don't do it there. Like, guys will talk shit, call each other out, but they don't do it I still don't think it's slight honor, but we haven't gotten to healthy conflict in most high performing honor-based organizations, military, first responders, fire, athletics. Even though they're honor-based around a common goal and they need the team, we still don't know how to deal in healthy conflict. So I'm actually experiencing for the first time what it feels like in K4, in our K4 community, to have a bunch of men, and we still make mistakes. Don't get me wrong. We're still learning, blow out of a vehicle here. Like, these guys nobody's willing to budge. So we still have challenges. We're still working through that, but it's really the ability to have a healthy conflict and have other men that you trust, that you actually value their opinion. Like, I know Philip, we keep going deeper and deeper into our relationship. And, I remember there was a time when I was way back when starting this journey, and I was attracting unhealthy relationships. And he was like, you're not allowed to have unhealthy relationships anymore. For you, for the future, for what you're bringing into the world, like, you're not allowed. And it was like, nobody had ever told me that. I'm sure all my friends had years had seen me play out these roles over and over and over again and struggled and this and that, but nobody ever had the courage to challenge me with it. And if anything, if they shame me, I'm like, fuck you, get out of my life. But if they lovingly say, hey man, you're better than that, there's another level for you, and I know what you want, and this isn't it. And so the next time I would see a potential partner that I was used to be attracting, I would then think, is this good for the kingdom? Is this good for the men in my community? Am I going to be better because of them? And it, for the first time, got me to move away from, again, that self or that need to fill my own external validation, which was the adolescent currency I was running. And it got me moving into mature masculine. It was like, is this going to serve my mission? Is this this partner going to help me serve my community, like my allies? And it changed how I started to view the potential partner. So I think that the community really changes things in a high level when you respect them, when you trust them, and you build that trust through the accountability and healthy conflict, is the irony. Without it, you don't really get to those high levels of trust, because everybody's still kind of standoffish, playing nice guy or playing shadow. They're either bullying each other or they're not saying anything. And then there's no conflict there.
Ideally, that same dynamic should be levered, like in that law firm that you're at, people should be honorably driven to perform for the sake of their tribe, like, because it feels good to contribute and to behave honorably. Like that is the most meaningful, purposeful, fulfilling things for humans, is to contribute honorably.
Yeah.
And it's missing in the world.
It is. But so Josh, when Philip was willing to tell you what he thought you needed to hear for your well-being, that's obviously predicated on a shared trust. But then on your end of that equation, there's the willingness to hear it. And you shared that before that, you might just kind of brush everyone's feedback off as, whatever. What did you have to activate in you to allow that willingness to receive what he was saying?
Well, we'd already established our values, our shared values. Like, we knew we were hunting something bigger. And I knew he was aligned with what we were hunting, and we'd had spending time together. And through earlier challenges, when I would bring something up, I saw how we started to engage with the world, that he was in integrity with that. There wasn't because sometimes people will say, hey, this is our values, and then they're out of integrity. But every time we would go back to that and recommit, we would both essentially surrender if we had different viewpoints, or if I was feeling overwhelmed and I brought something, he'd be like, I got it. We learned to build trust, I think, earlier on in the dynamic, where I think other relationships, a guy will say something of who he is in the world, and then you challenge a little bit, and then you realize he's not there. And so you don't have that same trust, because he's not embodying the values that he said he is. And so I think that created a foundation between us of like, and I did the same thing. So I think we learned to go, we really are modeling the values that we said we are. So there's trust, and we can trust we're hunting something bigger than our different viewpoints or our different perspectives. And I'd also say the archetypes really help. When I recognized, if I moved from lover to magician, and for anybody hearing this, we have a whole deep dive on these 4 primary archetypes. And Philip tends to be more in warrior king. I need that for my well-being. I need that feedback from warrior king, because the warrior can be really quick and judgmental and quick to make decisions. Sometimes I get too in my lover and I can't see through the woods because I'm all in the emotion, and I'm all like, specific with partners, I would see their trauma and their wounding and their past, and I'd have compassion for them. I wouldn't even have any judgment, period. So I needed some good, healthy judgment to make better decisions. And that comes from the warrior.
Hey, Josh, honestly, like when you were hanging out with the ladies you were hanging out with, it was basically you were on a bender and there was going to be, a week-long hangover after every bender. That was really where it just came from. It was like, hey man, you can't be offline for a week because, you were, like, it's like we have a sports game or something, and I see you out drinking the night before. I'm like, bro, got a fucking championship tomorrow. Yeah. You need to get some sleep because you need to be performing optimally. And I think that we're designed for that, particularly as men, but I think for women as well, is that we're designed to have this collective, reciprocal, shared thing we're working on, even if it's a lifestyle. Like, obviously we look at sports, hunting, law firm, but it should be bigger than that. It should be a shared collective journey of vitality and altruism that we're all partnering on as citizens. That I can take it all the way up there. As a citizen, hey, you can't throw your trash on the ground. Like, hey man, you can't be that fat. You can't be smoking. Like, we need to be better collectively in terms of our, vitality as a society. I really think it goes to that level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I also think, like, because you see friends and relationships for sometimes many years, sometimes they're just new, but I think you can also kind of discern between, is this a healthy partner and they're working through something to level up the relationship? Yeah. Or is this a looping pattern that is actually not healthy and it's creating debris? Or, like you said, does it feel like a hangover or a bender, a codependent dynamic? Or is it actually, are they working hard to grow it up, even though somebody may be offline for a little bit or not able to run the mission for a little bit, but they're getting vitality from that and they're going to be 10x? Or are they going back down and looping this and staying on a bottom feeder? So, because again, I think there's different discernments, but I think you learn that better. And I'd also say I'm much better at discernment now, right? After getting feedback if you don't get good feedback, how do you see yourself in the world? Yeah. You need that feedback.
Well, it's getting really clear on that. So it sounds like well, there's trust, and we can dive into how we actually gauge and build trust, because it's I think we're trusting in someone's skill set, trusting in someone's intent, like really what's in their heart. I might call that the skill set, the mind, the heart, or the intent being the heart, and then trusting in someone's nature as well. And maybe that's the archetypal component to it. But as you build that trust and then vet it against values, that's criteria in terms of who qualifies to give you feedback that you will accept, versus who's unqualified based on the criteria that you've defined. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really important to have those very clear, well-defined, verifiable values carved out, so that as we go and discern all of the different characters in the world that we interact with and go, okay, well, this particular individual meets these qualifications and therefore is someone that I can build a synergistic 10x relationship with. Whereas this person might on the front end fulfill my need to live out the archetype that stimulates me, maybe the lover being more of a healer type, having a healer type tendency, but this person's going to drain the hell out of me because I'm going to just heal them through and through and through and through and through. And then now it's a codependent time suck, and they're weaker because of it. I'm weaker because of it. Whereas if I went this route and I went with a person that maybe offers me tension 20% of the time, well, it's like that 20% is helping us both grow.
Yeah, I also think that when we are distracted, in general, when people are distracted, I'll use people. They want other people distracted because it validates their distraction story. And so
misery loves company.
Yep. So I'd say a lot of the men in the world that are highly distracted want other men to be distracted because it makes them feel okay with what they're doing. So you learn to trust, like those guys, if they're getting feedback from an unhealthy peer circle, they're going to think they're doing, I'll keep doing it. They're even going to get encouraged to keep doing it.
Yeah.
And I probably had unhealthy male friends for a lot of my life that would encourage me to do things So my operating system or my maps that I was using from the peer group around me had encouraged certain behavior from a healthy place. And so learning higher integrity, higher values, which actually align more with me, and then getting that rep started to change the peer group. Who's aligned with me now with the values I have? Who's actually on the same mission that I'm hunting? And how do I align with those allies so that we can level each other up? I think is a really big distinction on that piece, because there could be a lot of men out there and people are looking at it going, well, I trust this guy, I have integrity with this guy, but this guy's shadowing in his life and he's following old maps from his father. That is a certain way that's out of alignment with you. You're listening to that feedback and it's not a good filter system because he's not actually happy. So I think you use a benchmark when you're assessing your peer group. Are they happy? Are they growing? Are they actualizing the best possible version of themselves or going towards it and striving to be better at it? Or are they looking for benders and looking for shortcuts and, hiding in sneaky, leaky energy? Where are they at?
That piece is really important in terms of if there's guys that'll just appease less virtuous tendencies amongst others, because it directly leads to resentment, where we resent champions and we ourselves don't want to do better. We want them to do worse, is what it leads into in terms of an internalized narrative. And then that, being as resentful as it is one of the worst frames of mind that we can adopt, because then our energy is focused on tear them down, not build self up. And then that's going to start to creep into our relationships, how we engage with others, because we're naturally going to want to see them fall. I can't think of anything less good than that.
Which is victim villain. I'm a victim. They're the villain. You need to fall. You become the villain as you feel victimized, and you're now the villain, wanting them to fall. That's the villain victim.
Hey, everybody watching, hope you're witnessing and internalizing some of this high-end philosophical stuff. This is applied stoicism. It's applied philosophy, and brilliant. We did start the conversation around the central foundation of this whole journey around discipline, particularly expressed in the physical sense. So just for the people watching who, hey, this was all great, how do I actually apply this next? And the hero's journey always begins with that call to adventure, moving to the warrior place, engaging with the struggle ultimately of self. So in terms of discipline, and you guys have both competed, starts in the gym, starts in the kitchen. What are give us a couple just like go-to things that I could apply or explore this week.
Well, I've got a couple, but if Josh, you want to
go for it.
So I'd say there's two things. The first is impose a burden that is meaningful and directed towards an admirable outcome. So if you want to go full cold turkey and just jump in and take on 10 different disciplines at a time, like Josh did earlier this year, you can do that. But if folks aren't ready for that, it's like, well, impose one inconvenient stimulant onto yourself that is good. So make sure that, whether that's going to the gym, whether that's studying up on a new philosophy, whether that's going out and engaging a healthy, mutually beneficial relationship, and building rapport with someone, do something, impose a task onto yourself in that way. So that's on the positive side. On the negative side, remove an escape door. If we're building this house, but we've got escape doors, we need to remove them, lock them and throw away the key. So that could be, Josh was talking about accessing porn. That could be put a firewall on your computer. That could be if it's eating unhealthy foods, that could be closing that out.
Get it out of your house. Get all the sugar out of your house.
That could be an accountability report that you literally fill out and submit to someone who has an interest in your well-being. But to boil it down to two things, again, is impose just one a positive stressor and close one escape door. And that's it. Execute that for 2 weeks and then figure the rest out.
Woo!
The only other piece that I would add is, hey, yeah, I did a bunch of things at once, but you didn't see the 2-year 3 or 4 or 5 year journey up to that. So what I'd say is start small, start with something that you can do consistently every day to build the discipline muscle. So for me, it's like when I get back into the gym, the first thing is get there for my program, set a program, decide what you're going to do, and then just hit it consistently until you can hit it. And if you can't, reduce how much you thought you were going to do until you can hit it consistently. So start with a small foundation and start building the muscle of discipline as a first. And then once you start to hit that daily, and don't miss, that's the thing, keep reducing it until you can say, here's the plan. I'm going to go to the gym 3 days a week, 4 days a week, 5 days a week, 6 days a week, whatever that is. And just get there of what you say you're going to do, follow through with that is step one. And then once you finish completing that and you're hitting that consistently, then you can start to build a little bit more time in. But that would be my biggest takeaway. What people think they're going to go from here to here like that. It's not about the big changes. It's actually about the small, subtle changes, but you do them every day consistently. There's a really good book called The Slight Edge, and it talks about if I just take one step forward versus one step back, my trajectory, one step forward, one step forward, one step forward, one step forward, just these slight little micro improvements versus one step back, one step back, one step back. I'm in a whole different trajectory. So you're either growing or dying. Make one step to grow daily towards something, and you'll build integrity, you'll build self-trust, you'll build discipline.
Brilliant. All right. Hey, my friends, Dr. Corey Castillo, it's been an honor having you here. How can we follow you, find you, connect with you?
My website, CoreyMCastillo.com. It's CoreyMCastillo.com.
Truth and Spears?
Well, that's my company name, but the website's CoreyMCastillo.com is connected to it.
Beautiful. Just love the energy and the space that you hold in the world.
Thanks,
More
man.
of you will make us better. So thanks for holding the tribe together, my brother. And hey, Josh, always great to hang out with you, my friend and ally. And for everybody else watching this who are on the arduous and steep path towards leadership and resiliency and making a difference in your life, stay battle tested.